A blood pressure of 128/62 can be more dangerous than 145/88. Most doctors will smile at the first one, and that smile is exactly the problem. Let me tell you about a morning in October 2023. A 72-year-old man named Harold sat in his kitchen in Toledo, drinking his coffee, feeling completely fine. He'd taken his blood pressure that morning like he did every day, 129/58. He wrote it in his little notebook, the one he'd kept for 11 years, and he felt good about it, proud even. His bottom number kept getting lower every year, and he thought that meant he was getting healthier. He was wrong, and nobody had ever told him why. 6 weeks after that peaceful morning, Harold was in an ambulance. Now here's what I need you to understand before we go one step further. What happened to Harold wasn't hiding in either of those two numbers. It was hiding in the space between them. And that same space is printed on every single blood pressure reading you have ever been handed in your life. You've looked at it 1,000 times. You've just never been taught to subtract. I'm Dr. Eric Wells, and everything I do here is for adults past 60 who are tired of walking out of a rushed appointment with a pat on the shoulder and a vague, "keep it up." Because the number that predicts the most trouble is almost never the number they circle on your printout. And once you understand what it's whispering to you, you will never look at your blood pressure the same way again. But before I show you the exact danger threshold, the specific number where the research gets genuinely uncomfortable, I have to show you what that gap is actually doing inside your chest with every heartbeat, because it's worse than most people imagine. Stay with me. Let's go back to Harold for a second. When his reading said 129/58, subtract those and you get 71. 71. And I'll explain in just a moment why any number above 60 should make you sit up straight in your chair. His doctor never subtracted. In a rushed appointment with a waiting room full of people, nobody has the 10 quiet minutes it takes to explain what I'm about to explain to you. The system runs on speed, and the slow-moving dangers get waved right through with a friendly goodbye. So what is that gap actually telling you? Picture your largest artery, the aorta. It's about the width of a garden hose, and it carries every drop of blood out of your heart. When you're young, that hose is soft and springy. Every time your heart beats, the aorta stretches to absorb the punch, then gently squeezes back between beats to keep the blood flowing smooth and steady. Engineers would call it a shock absorber. Your body just calls it being young. But here's the part almost nobody explains. The stretchiness of that hose comes from a protein called elastin, and your body lays down almost all the elastin it will ever have before you turn 30. After that, you're spending down the savings account. Every heartbeat flexes those fibers. Around 100,000 beats a day, close to 40 million a year. By the time you're 70, that hose has stretched and snapped back over 2.5 billion times. And nothing that flexes 2.5 billion times stays soft. The elastin phrase, the body patches the gaps, but not with springy material. It patches them with a stiff protein called collagen, the same tough stuff your tendons are made of. So slowly, quietly, year by year, your garden hose is turning into a copper pipe. I want you to hold on to that image, because in a minute I'm going to show you the 4 things that can actually slow this hardening down. And one of them costs you nothing and takes about 20 minutes a day. But first you need to see what the stiff pipe does to your two numbers. Because it does something sneaky. When the pipe can't stretch anymore, the force of your heartbeat has nowhere to go, so the top number climbs. That part most people expect. But here's the twist. That same stiffness means the pipe can't squeeze back between beats either. So the pressure collapses lower than it should. The bottom number falls. Do you see what just happened? The top went up, the bottom went down, and the gap between them yawned wide open. That's Harold. His top number barely moved in a decade. His bottom number slid quietly downward. 68, then 64, then 60, then 58. And every single year, taken alone, that falling bottom number looked like good news. 60 is lower than 64, right? He congratulated himself every time. But strung together, those 4 numbers weren't good news at all. They were a signature, the exact fingerprint of an aorta turning to stone. Now stay with me, because there's a second thing the stiff pipe does, and this is the part that actually causes the heart attack. When your heart beats, It sends a pressure wave down your arteries. That wave hits the branches and bounces back toward the heart, like a ripple bouncing off the far end of a bathtub. In a young, soft artery, that wave travels slowly and arrives back late, right when the heart is resting. And that timing is perfect, because your heart muscle feeds itself during the rest phase, not the pumping phase. But a stiff pipe carries that wave fast, way too fast. So the wave comes racing back early and slams into the heart at the wrong moment. It piles onto the top number, making it worse. And it abandons the rest phase when your heart was counting on it. So now your heart is working harder against a bigger load while getting less blood to feed itself. More demand, less supply, from the very same stiff artery. That's not a statistic, that's a plumbing failure. And it's precisely why a wide gap predicts heart attacks so reliably. So what's the actual number? Where does the comfortable zone end? Here it is. A pulse pressure around 40 is the classic healthy figure. That's your textbook 120/80. Anything up to about 50 is generally considered normal across most of adult life. Between 50 and 60, you've entered what I'd call the watch zone. Not an emergency, but a signal worth tracking, not dismissing. And once that gap crosses 60, that's where the research gets uncomfortable fast. Investigators working with the famous Framingham Heart Study data reported that in adults over 50, every 10-point widening of that gap was associated with roughly a 20% jump in coronary heart disease risk. Not the top number alone, not the bottom number alone, the gap. Harold's gap was 71. He was 11 points into the danger zone, and nobody in that clinic ever subtracted. Now, before I show you the 4 ways to narrow that gap, I have to warn you about something, because there's a way to read this number that will mislead you badly. And it's the single most important thing I'll say in this whole video. Almost none of the popular coverage even mentions it. But first, let's make sure the numbers you're subtracting are even correct. Because here's an uncomfortable truth. Most people take their blood pressure at home completely wrong, and pulse pressure is brutally unforgiving of sloppy technique. Here's the mistake that costs the most. Your arm, specifically the cuff, must sit level with your heart. If you let your arm dangle at your side or drop it into your lap, gravity adds pressure and can inflate your top number by as much as 8 to 10 points. That's a false alarm manufactured out of thin air. Rest your forearm on a table so the cuff sits at about mid-chest height, roughly level with your nipple line. And there's more that quietly wrecks your reading. Crossing your legs at the knee pushes the number up. Talking during the measurement, even a few words, can add 10 points or more. A full bladder nudges it higher. So here's your simple routine. And think of it as a self-observation experiment, not a medical test. For 7 days, sit with your back supported and both feet flat on the floor. Empty your bladder first. Stay quiet for 5 minutes before you start. Then take 2 readings in the morning and 2 in the evening, and write down every single one. At the end of the week, throw out day 1 entirely. First day readings always run high because you're nervous. Average the rest. Then subtract. Now you have your real gap, not a ghost. All right, I promised you a warning, and here it is. This is the piece I most want you to carry out of this video. Your pulse pressure has to be read alongside the pressure it's sitting on top of. Picture 2 people, both with a gap of exactly 70. The first person reads 160/90. Wide gap, but the whole system is running high. A stiff artery under heavy load. The second person reads 110/40. Same 70-point gap. But the entire system is running low, and that bottom number of 40 may mean the heart and the organs are being genuinely starved during the rest phase. Same gap, 2 completely different animals. And this exact distinction, is where a well-meaning treatment can quietly go wrong. I'll come back to it, because it's the crux of everything. Don't let me forget. Now, the good news, and it's real good news. Some of this stiffness is fixed, but a meaningful part of it is functional and modifiable. Your arteries are still listening, and there are 4 levers with genuine evidence behind them. The first one is the zero-cost habit I promised, and it's not what most people over 70 assume. It's not straining under heavy weights. In fact, heavy lifting with a held breath has been linked in some studies to more stiffness, not less. What actually softens the pipe is rhythmic aerobic movement, brisk walking, cycling, swimming. around 30 minutes on most days. A rush of blood during exercise signals the delicate lining of your vessels to release nitric oxide, a molecule that relaxes the arterial wall. Do it consistently for a few months, and studies have measured real improvements in arterial flexibility. Not magic, just biology responding to movement. The second lever comes from one of the best nutrition trials ever run in heart medicine, the DASH sodium study. When older adults with higher starting pressures cut their sodium, the top number dropped more than the bottom number. Read that again. That means the gap narrowed. Not just the overall level, the gap itself. And here's the part that surprises people. It's not mostly the salt shaker. Roughly 70% of the sodium in your life is hiding in the bread, the deli meat, the canned soup, the sauces. These aren't bad foods, but for an aging vessel, that hidden sodium load may quietly work against you. Shift toward whole foods rich in potassium, which works in the opposite direction. The third lever is nitrate-rich vegetables, and this one has a clean, elegant mechanism. Beets are the famous one, but leafy greens like spinach and arugula count too. Your body converts their natural nitrates into that same nitric oxide the exercise produces. Studies of beet juice have measured modest but real drops in blood pressure within hours. It stacks right on top of the walking because both are pulling the same lever. The fourth lever is blood sugar and weight. Remember how the body stiffens the artery over time? High blood sugar speeds that process up, gluing the arterial proteins into a more rigid lattice through something called cross-linking. Keeping your blood sugar in a healthy range slows the chemical hardening from the inside, and losing even a modest amount of belly weight has been linked to measurable improvements in how your vessels behave. None of these reverses decades overnight. What they do is bend the curve. And when you're dealing with a number that compounds your risk every 10 points, bending the curve is worth an enormous amount. Now, the warning I made you keep in your back pocket. This is the part that most directly protects a person like Harold. When a doctor sees a high top number, the instinct is to bring it down. And lowering a genuinely high top number matters. I'm not telling you to ignore it, but here's the trap. Some blood pressure medications, when they're used to chase that top number down in a person who already has a low bottom number and a wide gap, can push that bottom number even lower. And there's a floor. Below roughly 60, and especially below 50, a low bottom number stops being harmless. Remember, your heart feeds itself during the rest phase, and the bottom number is the rest phase. Researchers have described what they call a J-shaped curve. Drive the bottom number too low in an older adult, and the risk that was falling starts climbing back up because the heart muscle is being underfed. So the goal is not simply a lower top number. The goal is a narrower gap achieved without starving the bottom number. Those are not the same thing, and confusing them is how a treatment meant to help can quietly make the real problem worse. Now, and let me be very clear, I am absolutely not telling you to change or stop any medication. Never do that on your own. What I'm handing you is a conversation, and it's a conversation almost no older adult ever thinks to have. So here's exactly what to bring to your next appointment. Bring your 7-day log with the gap already calculated. Then say these words. My pulse pressure is running about, given my age, does that concern you? And what is it telling us about the stiffness of my arteries? That single question drags the gap onto the table, where it usually never appears. And if you're already on blood pressure medication, add this one. As we work on my top number, are we keeping an eye on my bottom number so it doesn't fall too low? Is there a floor you don't want it to drop below? Those aren't confrontational questions. They're the questions of a patient who finally understands that the two numbers are a system, not a pair of separate verdicts. Any good doctor will welcome them. So let's go back to that peaceful kitchen in Toledo. Harold, with his 11-year notebook, feeling proud of a falling bottom number that was actually the sound of his aorta turning to stone. The tragedy wasn't that his numbers were catastrophic. The tragedy was that nobody ever did the subtraction. 2 seconds of arithmetic that no one ever performed. You're not going to make that mistake. Not anymore. The top number and the bottom number have sat side by side on every reading you've ever been handed. And somewhere after 60, the relationship between them, the gap, becomes the more honest witness to what's happening inside your largest artery. A reading that earns a smile can hide a gap that deserves a hard second look. So do the subtraction. Do it on your very next reading. Build the 7-day log this week. and carry that number into the room where the decisions actually get made. That is the whole reason I do this, to hand you the number that predicts the trouble, the one that goes uncircled on the printout year after year. If this changed the way you see your own readings, tap the like button, because it genuinely helps this reach more folks over 60 who are getting the same reassuring smile Harold got. And there's one more thing I need to tell you, because there's a second silent number on your reading, one that determines whether your heart is quietly enlarging without a single symptom. Most people have never heard of it, and it can change everything before you feel a thing. That's the next video. Watch for it. It's the one I most want you to see. I'll see you there. Disclaimer: this video is for general educational and informational purposes only and is not medical advice. It is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Individual health situations vary. Always consult your own physician or qualified healthcare provider before making any changes to your diet, exercise, medication, or health routine. Never stop or adjust prescribed medication without direct guidance from your doctor.